Tony Lyons here with another tutorial for Nuke, going off the After Effects to Nuke series. And in this tutorial I'm going to be showing you some 3D camera projections in Nuke, similar to the ones that Andrew Kramer did in After Effects for this Alchemist wall. And I'll show you the result right now. It's just this wall zooming out here, dollying up, and then the text coming in. And so we're going to see how to do this inside of Nuke using some 3D cards and some motion blur and vector blurs for the depth of field. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is after you've imported these files, such as the sky and the sand and the pyramids, which you can get from videocopilot.net. This tutorial, I think it's number 6. So what I just did real quick is brought these in, premulted them, and just did a quick over of the sand and then the pyramids and the foreground wall. And so I believe you guys can set this up pretty easily, just over these things in the right order. And for this wall, this text comes in smaller than the wall. Oh, I'll turn my proxy off. The text comes in smaller than the wall, so I just transformed it up to match. And this will be fading on and off at the end of the sequence. And so from there, you make this little script, and I'll start doing that now. Okay, so first what we're going to do is make a camera. And this technique we're going to be using, instead of a card system, we're going to be using a card 3D. And the reason we're going to do that is because it's not a very complicated move, and the card 3D loads a lot quicker than a regular card system would, because it does not have to go through a scanline renderer. But what the card 3D will do, if we plug it in, and I'll plug a camera into this, is it's pretty much the same parameters as a regular card. And if I bring this back in Z space, you can see I can still do the same types of stuff, like rotate it, and it'll give me the output that a scanline renderer might from this angle, and you can actually look at these in 3D as well. Get rid of some of these. So you can actually view the card in 3D, even though it's not a 3D node, it's a 2D node. But it'll give you the preview. So if you're more comfortable with cards, you could actually do this with a card and then copy the values over, but I think we should probably just do it with the card 3D itself. Okay, so I'm going to make a new card 3D. And like I mentioned, it goes a lot quicker than a card system would rendering out of a scanline renderer, because it does not have to do the scanlines. It's just basic trigonometry that's going on in this card to do some like corner pinning and rotating and stuff, and that's what the output is. So it's kind of more like a transform node than a 3D scanline render. So we plug the sky in, and then we plug the camera into the camera, and go to the 3D view, and you can see it defaults to -1 in Z. And so if we move it back like so, we can start placing the card at distances. But there's a big problem. As we move it back, the size does not change to scale up to the screen. We'd probably want it to match resolution here. And just a quick note, my project settings are set to 760 by 560, which is what these PNGs came in as. Anyways, this card doesn't scale up. And one thing that Andrew did in Nuke, in After Effects, was he, after the fact, scaled it up to match the frame, and it snapped really nice. Now there's no way to do that really, to snap it really nice in Nuke. Now of course you can use this uniform scale to try to get it to match, but that is really a pain in the butt sometimes, especially if you're messing around with the Z while you're trying to do that, because as soon as you get it to be farther away, then you need to scale it, and we don't really know what this uniform scale is supposed to be. So I went ahead and did a little research, and there's actually a way to get a good ratio, like equation going on in this uniform scale that basically says no matter how far away it is in Z, it's going to scale up to match exactly 1-to-1 on the frame, which means that as we scale it back farther, it'll scale up bigger to match these cones, or these the viewing aperture of the camera. So the equation is over here. So the uniform scale of the card 3D. And the expression that we have to type into the uniform scale is the camera's aperture, the H aperture, divided by the camera focal length, times negative translate z, which is right up here. And it sounds kind of confusing, and it kind of is, but we'll just see what I'm talking about here. So we have our camera and our card 3D, and so we go to the projection tab in the camera, and we're going to control drag the horizontal aperture right here. First we're going to bring up an expression, so click equals on the uniform scale. So we'll shift drag this horizontal aperture, and we'll delete this Nuke knob, okay? And then we'll divide it by the focal length, like so. And I'm going to put these in parentheses. Okay, that gives us this number. And then we're going to times it by translate z. Negative translate z, actually. So delete this, and then we want it to be a positive number, so that's why we put the negative. So it's, instead of -4, it'll be 4 now, because this z is going negative. As soon as we click OK, you'll see the card has just scaled up so it matches exactly with the viewing angle of the camera. And as we scale the card up closer or farther away from the camera, it gets bigger and smaller to match the view always. And I'll prove it to you. So I'll go into the card, and I'm viewing it here. Don't mind this extra bit of pixel information. So I'm going to flip back and forth between the premult, which was the original sky here, and this card 3D. I'll zoom in really close. You can see it is 1-to-1. There's no change. No matter how far away, I'll put this over to 600. Still no change. And we can see that it is in fact really far away. So that is some really useful stuff for quickly placing some cards. So now we can just copy and paste this card and attach it to this camera, card 3D, and now we have our nightstand, which we can bring a little closer. And so we can double click this, so then we can place our nightstand and all the other layers. Now, you're going to say, well, that's going to be really hard for me to remember all this dragging camera aperture and all this focal lengths and all this jazz. There is actually an easier way. We're going to luck out on this one. So I explained it here, and for the sake of remembering myself. So the default settings of a camera in Nuke are always the same. So if I make a camera, the defaults of the focal length and the horizontal aperture are always 50 and 24.576. And even if I change my project settings, if I click S, I change this to 4K, and I make another camera, we go to the projection tab, it's still 50 and still 24.576. So these values never change. So that means that the first part of the equation gets simplified because it's always the default. It only changes if we change it ourselves or if we import some camera data from the the file tab, and it changes from, say, some Maya file or some other thing. So the number that the first equation, the camera 1 H aperture divided by camera 1 focal, in Nuke at least, is always going to be 0.49152. And so that is now the magic number. So 0.49, and I'm just going to copy paste that number, and I'll show you here. So I'll make a new card 3D, and I'll plug my camera into it. And in the uniform scale, I'll paste that number, 0.49152, and then I'll just times it by negative translate.z. And it's set to 1. But as soon as we go in here, now there's no expression linked to any camera or anything. But this card will still do that scaling trick. And if we see it here, it is still 1:1. Well, I changed my resolution size, so it's no longer 1:1. But if I change it back, now it is 1:1. So, if I were you guys, I'd maybe copy this into a notepad or just remember it or do something, but every time you type this into a uniform scale of a card and plug the card into a camera, or this works also with a regular card, this will work as well by just typing it into the uniform scale down here and picking a camera to do it off of. But that will work, and yeah, it's pretty useful stuff, I think. And so one thing that I use to organize some scripts, actually we'll do this really fast. We're going to copy these cards and just quickly plug them into these cameras. Same camera here. Copy it again. Oops. Okay, copy it again. Put it down here and make sure I got the camera. Drag it up. Okay. So now we're going to start positioning our cards. And one thing to note is that with actual cards, you can make a scene node and put all the cards into them. But with these card nodes, card 3D, you can't do that because this is expecting a 3D node, and this is actually a 2D node. So in order to view them all in 3D space at the same time, just make something really quick like a merge and just connect all of them into the merge using the additional A pipes. Just throw them all in there. I know it's messy, but this is just to test things out. Alright, we'll put this here. And view this merge like so. And it's not going to make any sense in the viewer, but I'm going to hide these inputs because they're annoying. So Alt-H, hide the inputs. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to 3D, and we should be able to see all of our cards, if I'm not mistaken. So just go up here, and we're going to do this. Where are my controls? Okay, so this is our title, so it's going to be really close to the camera, like so. And we got, wow, we got our sky, which is really, really far back. Here we go. And we'll put it about there. And then what do we got here? This is our sand, so we're going to put it closer to the sky. Like this. And I'll bring my sky a little closer. Like so. And then that should leave us with some pyramids, if I'm not mistaken. Is it connected? Yeah. Here we go, some pyramids. And we'll put the pyramids about halfway. And I'm going to bring these in just a little tiny bit. Maybe keep the sky out here. And I'm probably going to bring this wall out as well. It's a little close for my taste. And we'll bring it to like right about there. Okay. So now we have some depth, and we wanted to bring these last two guys a little closer together. Okay, so now we have some significant depth in here. And so I don't like all these pipes going all over my script. So what I like to do personally is I made a little output pipe node. If I just type in output pipe, it comes up. And all this is a really fancy colored node that I can input a name. So in this case, camera. And I'll put this on my camera node like so. And then I'm going to copy, paste it. And I'm going to switch this to input hidden so it tells us, and I'm hide input. And this will make sense in just a second. So I like to drag these around my script and start plugging things in. And the label is output pipe from the camera, and it's a hidden input. So even though the input is hidden, we can just click it and find out where it's coming from, or find the other one that's named the same in our script. And so if I just plug these in, I will have a nice organized script that still makes sense to people, especially if they just kind of mouse over. I'm going to delete this guy. Actually, I'll keep it. We'll name this merge our 3D viewer. 3D scene, actually. Scene. Make it bold. Okay. So now, as you can see, all these pipes are going into this camera. This is one camera just being piped all over, versus having a bunch of dots and lines going everywhere. I figure this is just a little cleaner, a little nicer to look at, but still makes sense, and still you can still trace it back for people that come in that haven't seen the script before. You can use any workflow you want to, it's just what I prefer. And so I'm just going to use my cheat sheet for a second. Okay. So what we're going to do after this is we're going to animate this camera. And so we're going to go to frame, say 80, and we're going to keyframe. We're going to keyframe the translation and rotation, I think. And we'll go to frame 1. And let me just get rid of this title. And let's push in a little bit with the camera. As you can see, if I zoom out, the parallax is already going in there. Let's move in to right about here. And we'll move down a little bit so the wall is covering a lot. And then we'll move the camera over this to the right, the translate. And I'm just nudging it. And what we can also do is go back to frame 80. Okay, we keyed the rotation. Now, here's the tricky part with the pivot in the camera. So the camera does have a pivot point that you can rotate around, but probably shouldn't have. Here we go, cards. So you could go and mess with this pivot point, but I don't think you can really. Yeah, you can't really grab it from the 3D and move it around. But what you can do is pull up an axis, which is just a point in 3D space, or a locator, if you will. So you pull up an axis, and we'll name it camera pivot. Camera pivot. And we're going to control drag the translation into the pivot. And what that means is that this axis is now the pivot point of the camera. And so from there we can pull the pivot point all the way out to meet, say, I don't know, halfway between the sky and the sand or so. So now when we rotate the camera will rotate around that point. I hope it does, at least. Pretty sure it will. There you go. It's rotating around that pivot. So we'll set this back to 0. And now we'll go to frame 1. Did I set it to 0? 0. Okay. And go to frame 1. Ooh, I don't know why this is animated. Delete key. Okay. So then I'm going to go back to my end of my comp here. And I'm going to just, you know what, instead of translating it down, I'll just rotate it so it's down. And one thing I think I forgot to do, actually. Yeah, one thing I forgot to do, I'll go back to frame 80, was translate this wall back down so it matches this original wall here. See, the original wall was higher. The end wall with the text is lower than the original wall. So I need to go to this view, and I'll pull up my wipe with W key, and I'll pull up this alchemist wall. And so 80 is our last frame. So what we're gonna have to do is go into this card and just move it down in the -y and just nudge it up. That should work. Yeah, it should be fine. Okay, so that is the ending position of that. And if we fade our text on, you can see it's in this exact same place. Okay, we're good to go there. So let's just go back to frame 1, and this will help us a lot. So I'm going to delete this animation, delete these keys. Okay, so I'm going to rotate it in, I think, Z? No, it's not Z, it's X. So I'm going to rotate this down so that it is below the wall. We can't see those pyramids anymore. And I'm actually going to, on frame 80, I'm going to key this text now. So mix is 0, and then say frame 90, it becomes 1. Okay, great. And so this is our animation. I'll just play it back for you guys. It's preview mode. There we go. That's not too bad. Okay. So the next step is adding that depth of field. So we're going to look at these card 3Ds, and the card 3D is a pretty powerful node because it can actually render out motion blur inside of the card 3D right here. Motion blur. If we turn that on, the card will automatically have motion blur. So we'll do that for all of these. Changing the shutter offset to centered as well. Motion blur, motion blur. Okay. So now these will be correctly motion blurred for any of the motion. And kind of jumping around a little bit, but I just realized that the curves are going to be very linear in this camera. I'm going to quickly go to the camera in the curve editor, and I'm going to select the beginning keys and hit H, and the N keys and hit H, and that'll make the curves nice and smooth. So do the same thing with the rotate. H and H, and you can see that makes it nice and smooth. So it's going to load really slow, but it should be a smoother move. So after that, the other thing to note is that these cards, as you can see right here, RGBA, also render out depth, which is actually pretty impressive. So if I go to the depth, I'm now looking at depth, and you can tell it's there by if you increase the f-stop. And this is going to tell you, it's just going to normalize the depth for you. Right? But the one thing that's kind of odd is that the depth is not pre-multiplied. So as you can see, this card has an alpha. I think you can see it. Oh, here we go. This card has an alpha. It's just the sky. But then this depth does not get affected by that at all, which is kind of strange. Not really sure why. Depth channel. Yeah. So no alpha channel there. Well, that's a really easy fix. So just pull up a premult, and by default, the premult will multiply RGB by the alpha, but we wanted to multiply depth by the alpha. So now you can see the alpha is being applied to the depth, and that's pretty important for our other layers, or else we're going to have just planes of values covering each other. So just take this pre-multiply depth and copy it to the others, and you can see there are the pyramids, and here's the wall. So now if I look at the very end, nothing's happening. Why not? So when these merges, they're only merging RGBA over RGBA. So we need to also merge depth channel. Here we go. You can see those are the hills. And if we change this RGB and this, this merge to depth, look at the pyramids. And if we change this merge to also merge the depth, now we get the wall. Now that's starting to look more like a depth channel. Got the foreground, midground, and background. Okay. So now we're working with something here. So what I'm going to do is change this back to RGBA. So, okay, I'm going to shuffle out the depth. So just make a shuffle and then click on depth, and you'll get this black and white image. And in order to grade depth channels, it's pretty easy. Just view the shuffle so you're not grabbing the grades values. So take the white point, click on the nearest object, which would be the wall, and the black point and the farthest object, which would be the sky, and we'll get, here we go. So now, let's clamp the white. So now we can also mess with the gamma if we want to get this depth to be right. Okay, so that looks good. Closest is white, and then it goes slowly back to the dark. And so we're going to grade all channels here. So it also does the alpha, because if it's just set to RGB, it doesn't do the alpha. And then I'm just going to make a copy and copy the alpha channel from A, which is what we just made, and put it into the depth. And I could have graded this, I could have just graded the depth, but I kind of like to see this shuffle out. I kind of like to visualize it in the script. So you can do it however you want, but basically just grade the depth up to make it a little more normalized, 0 to 1. So now we have our depth channel, and I'm going to go about midway right here. Like maybe this, actually this frame is good. Okay, so we can see our pyramids and our wall and everything here. We're going to use a zblur. Okay, now we get a zblur. And what we want it to use is depth. So it's already using depth by default. But it doesn't really know what to do. So we're going to have to tell it where to shift focus to. I'll change this back to 1 for now. So what we're going to do is go to this button called Focal Plane Setup. And this is going to turn blue. But if we increase the depth of field, which is the range of where what's in focus, and then we start moving the focus plane, which is where is it in focus, we can start seeing some interesting stuff. So we can see the wall turns green, and if we move it farther away, the pyramids turn green. And I'm going to increase this depth of field here. And so everything that's red is behind the focus plane, and everything that's blue is in front of the focus plane. But both red and blue are out of focus, and the only thing that's in focus is green. And so this is going to really help us. So I'm going to get to this point. I'm going to slide the focus plane around until the wall is in focus, which is about 0.1 or 0.9. And I'm going to make this depth of field smaller. Okay, so I'm going to go back to frame 1. I'm going to keyframe this, and I'm going to keyframe the depth of field. And I'm going to make this maximum. Actually, I'm going to make the size of the blur about 20 and the maximum 20 as well. So if I switch back, you can see the wall is in focus, and this size is just the size of the blur. And I think maximum is also going to change that too. So I think maximum, if it's around 12, is pretty good. So I'm going to keyframe that as well. Size. Yeah, it's kind of playing around with size and maximum. It's kind of strange, but let's go all the way to frame 80. And we're going to increase the depth of field. I'm going to shift, actually we'll increase it to about 2. We're going to shift the focus plane. Oh. Increase the depth of field a little bit more. It's kind of weird playing with these values. And then we're also going to turn this maximum down to 0. And so if we step through with this 10, I'm just going to preview it with this, and I'm just going to look at this top part, this moon. So if we step through now, what we should see is that the blur gradually gets dimmer. And I might have actually went too far with this focus plane. So I'm going to ease it back to 1.5 so that this front area is always in focus. But yeah, with that maximum going down, we should see that it slowly goes from the background being out of focus to being completely in focus as we pull out of the shot. So after that, it looks like we are done. And so I'm going to quickly, I'm going to take this write node I already made, and you'll want to just write it to your own directory. One thing, oh no, this should be fine. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly write this out. Okay, that's rendered out now, and I'm going to look at it and let you guys see it. It's looking pretty good. Nice subtle blur effect. Zooming out and text comes on. One thing I did go back and change, I rendered out previously and I noticed an error. The zblur was linear and the cameras had the catem roll to it, so I just went in and clicked H to give it some nice curvature on those curves to the zblur. And that's the only thing I changed, just to give it a more non-linear look, a smoother look. And so yeah, that's it. And looks pretty good. I will say that it took a little bit to render, and now that I'm thinking about it, with a shot like this, you could probably set something up with just some defocuses. Probably could have just made a defocus here and gone over to this guy, done something like this, keyframed it off, and go back to frame 1. Probably could have done that, and it would have worked just as good. Maybe would have saved some render time and such. But you know, if you're doing this for a more complicated shot, I suppose the zblur is fine. It is a very expensive node, though. Okay, I'm going to do a quick recap on some of the important stuff that I just covered. One of them is use card 3D instead of a card. Ooh, car. Instead of a card where you can, because it renders a lot quicker, and it does like basically the same math, and will give you a better result, I think. The uniform scale in the card expression would be 0.49152 times negative translate z, and you type that into the card 3D uniform scale or the card uniform scale, and that will make the card line up with the viewing field of the camera. Use an axis node to control the camera's pivot point. We did that in the camera. Premult the depth by the alpha channel. Here. And then we got set merges to also merge the depth channel, and then we did that right here, also merge depth. And then just use the focal plane setup in the zblur and animate the focus plane, depth of field, and maximum for a shift focus. These three guys. And this guy. And then you should receive a pretty similar result. And again, if you guys want to follow this along, I'm going to post this script in here, as well as giving you a link to these elements on Video Copilot. I hope that was useful. This is Tony Lyons, and I'll see you guys next time.